Hey guys, tonight we're tiptoeing into the early 1900s. Just as the world is about to do something rather foolish again, it's 1914, and Europe, in all its powdered wig meat steam engine grandeur, is holding a very large and very loaded metaphorical match, right next to a barrel labeled global catastrophe. And wouldn't you know it, they strike it. You're drifting into a warm summer dusk in Sarajevo. The air is dense with birdsong and cigarettes. A band is playing somewhere badly. The Archduke Franz Ferdinand, who has a name that sounds like he should be in a rock bandit riding through town in an open car. Now, not to give anything away, but he probably shouldn't have. You're strolling along the cobbled streets behind his motorcade, enjoying the aroma of roasted chestnuts and diesel fumes, when suddenly bang, a young man named Gavrilo Princip, who has all the nerves of a 19-year-old trying to overthrow an empire before lunch, pulls the trigger, and with that one very sweaty act, we've officially launched the First World War. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, I'm curious, where in the world are you listening from? And what time is it on your clock right now? Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. So, back to our powder keg. Imagine a map of Europe, Austria, Hungary, clinging to its empire like an old man holding a moth-eaten coat, accuses Serbia of being behind the assassination. Historians still argue whether Serbia's government officially sanctioned the plan. Some say yes, others say it was just a rogue intelligence cell with enthusiasm and very poor judgment. Austria-Hungary sends Serbia a list of humiliating demands, basically, apologize, let us arrest your people. And also, please stop being a country. Serbia replies with a polite refusal wrapped in just enough diplomacy to confuse the Austrians. The result? War. Because, of course, now things get awkward fast. Russia, seeing itself as the self-appointed big brother of all Slavic nations, feels honor-bound to step in. Russian Tsar Nicholas II, who still thinks wars are winnable with big hats and honor, mobilizes his forces. This spooks Germany. Germany is like, I see where this is going, and declares war on Russia. Germany also declares war on France, just in case. You know, preemptively. They've got this plan called the Schlieffen Plan, which sounds like a massage technique but is actually a very ambitious military maneuver. It involves marching through neutral Belgium to surprise France. Belgium, unfortunately, was promised neutrality protection by Britain. Germany knocks politely at Belgium's door. Belgium says no. Germany kicks the door in anyway. This is the point where Britain, sipping tea and watching everything from afar, puts down the cup and mutters. Right then, they declare war on Germany. The British Expeditionary Force sails to France, and now we're really doing this. Millions of men are on the march. Baggage trains, cavalry, field kitchens. And this is true of a French officer who brought his dog and phonograph to the front line. His name was Albert, and the dog was named Satan. Not joking. The early battles are chaotic. France launches Plan 10T, which sounds exciting but mostly results in thousands of men charging machine guns with flags. Casualties mount faster than the generals can invent reasons for them. The British clash with the Germans at Mons, and then begin a steady retreat. Everyone's tired. Everyone's confused. The French fall back toward Paris. And just when it seems like the City of Lights might be flicked off, the Allies dig in at the River Marne. Taxi drivers in Paris famously drive soldiers to the front lines. It's the most patriotic Uber ride in history. There, the tide turns for a moment. The Germans retreat. The city is saved. But don't get too excited, because what comes next is trenches, long, cold, muddy, rat-infested trenches with names like Suicide Ditch and Dead Man's Alley. They stretch from the Swiss border to the North Sea, thousands of miles of misery and mold. Welcome to modern warfare, where you measure progress in feet and pay for it in lives. Above them, British warships began asserting dominance at sea. At the Battle of Heligoland Bight, 3 German cruisers are sunk. Britain's Royal Navy, with more battleships than any other fleet, begins a blockade of Germany. They aim to starve it into submission, but Germany's not out of tricks. They unleash a new weapon, the U-boat, submarines. Sleek and silent, stalk merchant ships beneath the waves. And for the first time, sailors must look down to see death coming. It's only been a few months. By Christmas of 1914, nearly 1 million soldiers are dead or wounded. The war has stretched from Belgium to the Black Sea. France, Germany, Russia, Britain, Serbia, Austro-Hungarian bleeding, and it's only just begun. Yet on that first Christmas Eve, in certain sections of the front, soldiers climb out of their trenches, they meet in no man's land, they sing carols, exchange chocolate, and famously play football. The truce is unofficial and short-lived, but for one quiet night, humanity peeks out through the smoke. And so ends our first night on the long road through World War I. Next up, Versailles X, Balkan blunders, and the strange adventures of East African Germans with portable bicycles. You'll see. But for now, let your thoughts settle like soft snow on forgotten battlefields. You're safe, you're warm, and nobody is marching anywhere tonight. So, you've survived the opening moves of the world's most avoidable war. Well done. Let's move a little further into the mud. Shall we? The year is still 1914, but the war has already outgrown Europe's imagination. On paper, Austria-Hungary was supposed to easily conquer Serbia, tidy up the Balkans, and return in time for schnitzel and imperial parades. Instead, their soldiers are freezing in the mountains, swatting mosquitoes the size of pigeons, and losing battles to a much smaller, much scrappier Serbian army. The Battle of CER is the first Allied victory of the Warand. It's Serbian. Not bad for a nation that had just been given an ultimatum like fold or be flattened. Their rugged hills, muddy tracks, and surprisingly spicy plum brandy all proved too much for the Austro-Hungarian troops. They're pushed back hard. Now here's a quirky bit. The Austro-Hungarian High Command, still dreaming in empire-wide languages, sends orders in German, Hungarian, and sometimes even Italian, none of which most Serbian villagers understand. The Serbians, on the other hand, speak with rifles and ambushes. Language barriers have never been so loud. Historians still argue whether the Austro-Hungarian leadership underestimated the terrain, the enemy, or just logic in general. But what's clear is that the war in the Balkans turns into a slow-motion humiliation for Vienna. And this, dear listener, is how an empire can get shin splints. Meanwhile, in East Prussia, Russia bliss, their enthusiasm makes a bold move. 2 Russian armies lumber across the border, hoping to sandwich the Germans. The problem, they're about 90 miles apart, and their generals aren't talking. Now enter Germany's new poster boys. General Paul von Hindenburg, who looks like he was born in a saddle, and Erich Ludendorff, whose brain moves faster than most armies. Together, they orchestrate the Battle of Tannenberg, a crushing victory that wipes out nearly an entire Russian army. The reason? The Russians are sending radio messages without encryption. Yes, they're broadcasting battle plans like weather reports, It's like shouting your password into a megaphone at a hacker conference. One historian put it best: it was not so much that the Germans won, but that the Russians lost harder. Back on the seas, Britain's blockade of Germany tightens. The Royal Navy begins choking off supplies coal, our food, even things like fertilizer. The goal is slow economic asphyxiation. But Germany retaliates with U-boats, sinking merchant ships and taking the war beneath the waves. And far beyond Europe, the colonies start to boil. In Africa, German and British colonial forces clash. In Togoland, modern-day Togo, Allied troops capture the colony quickly. But in German East Africa, Colonel Paul von Lettow-Vorbeckis, the man with the most Prussian name imaginable, launches a guerrilla campaign that ties down tens of thousands of British troops for years. His army marches thousands of miles on foot, evading, outsmarting, and generally irritating the British Empire at every turn. He even brings a portable printing press to issue war communiques in Swahili. Because why not? Meanwhile, Japan, ever the opportunist, joins the war on the side of the Allies. Their navy seizes German holdings in the Pacific. Samoa surrenders to New Zealand. German New Guinea falls to Australia. It is like a very polite, ocean-spanning game of risk. And in the skies things start to get experimental. Germany sends its massive Zeppelins to bomb British coastal towns. Picture a floating cigar the size of a football field, dropping explosives on sleeping civilians. The damage is limited, but the psychological effect, immense. People realize this war might come knocking at their rooftops. Meanwhile, British soldiers get their first taste of what trench life really means. Cold tea, yamtins, lice, and latrines that deserve their own horror film. You eat with rats, sleep with mud, and write poetry just to remember what feelings are. The British trench menu famously includes bully beef, a type of corned beef that can survive artillery fire and possibly the apocalypse. But for all the discomfort, there are flickers of absurdity. Soldiers write home about the trench newspapers. They produce little satirical rags with headlines like Mud Forecast, Eternal. Humor becomes a survival strategy. And now the winter sets in. On the Eastern Front, both Russia and Austro-Hungary stumble through the snow like exhausted dancers trying to remember their steps. Austria suffers another catastrophe at Lemanowa. The Russians are slowed, but not broken. The mountains, snow-covered and unforgiving, to become battlefield sand graves. At sea, Germany's U-boats notch their first major victory. The British cruiser Pathfinder is struck by a torpedo and sinks. It's the first ship in history sunk by a submarine-launched torpedo. The age of undersea warfare has truly arrived. As the year ends, the world is stunned. What began as a local conflict has erupted into a global cataclysm. Over 1 million men are dead. Entire towns and families are changed forever. Yet on Christmas Eve, 1914, something remarkable happens. Along the Western Front, in places where the guns fall silent, soldiers climb out of the trenches. They sing carols. They share cigarettes. They trade chocolate and buttons. In one spot, a football appears, probably kicked by a bored teenager with more mud than ambition, and a game begins between enemies. The Christmas truce is spontaneous, brief, and unauthorized, but it is real. Commanders are furious. They want the war to go on. The soldiers, for just a night, wanted to remember they were human. And so, as frost creeps across the scarred earth, you lay back, warm beneath blankets, far from trenches and telegrams, and listen to the sound of silence between the guns. Next up, submarines, snow blindness, and the world's most disastrous amphibious landing. By early 1915, The war has spread like an ink stain across a white tablecloth. Europe, Africa, Asia, even. The ocean depths are now part of the battlefield. And somewhere in the dusty halls of British command, someone possibly in a well-tailored uniform and an excess of confidence has an idea. They want to knock the Ottoman Empire out of the war fast. The Ottomans, long seen as the sick man of Europe, had recently surprised everyone by waking up and punching Russia in the face. Warships bombarded the Russian coast. Troops pushed across the Caucasus. And suddenly, the Eastern question had a new answer. Maybe don't underestimate them. So the British decide on a bold move. Enter the Dardanelles campaign. The plan: sail into the narrow straits, past some crusty old Ottoman forts, and show off the Royal Navy's muscle until Istanbulton, called Constantinople, surrenders out of sheer intimidation. You're on the deck of a British warship now. The sea air is sharp, and the gulls are suspiciously quiet. Ahead lie waters filled with ancient legends and modern minds. The bombardment begins, but the Ottomans, they don't blink. Hidden mines destroy 3 British battleships. Shore guns wreak havoc. The strait becomes a graveyard for good intentions and expensive metal. So, Plan B, land troops, welcome to Gallipoli. Now, if you've ever stubbed your toe and thought that could have gone better, imagine trying to invade a vertical cliff defended by machine guns, barbed wire, and soldiers who know every goat path by heart. That's Gallipoli. Troops from across the British Empire are ferried in. Brits, Indians, Newfoundlanders, and most famously, the Anzacs, Australian and New Zealand Army Corps. They land in April 1915, right onto Chaos. The terrain is hellish: steep ridges, dry gullies, and not enough water. Heat scorches by day, cold bites at night. The flies are enormous. The food is tinned mystery, and the toilets are a suggestion at best. The Ottomans, led by commanders like Mustafa Kemal's, future Ataturk himself, hold the high ground. Every advance becomes a bloodbath. And here's your quirky detail. Anzac soldiers invent a drip-rifly clever setup where water fills a can, tipping a rifle to fire after they've evacuated the trench. Why? To fake gunfire during a secret withdrawal? Brilliant. But also, wow. Gallipoli drags on for months. Heat, disease, and flies kill almost as many as bullets. The Allies achieve very little, except for creating the most legendary military disaster to inspire multiple national identities. Historians still debate whether Gallipoli could have worked. Some say the planning was flawed from the start. Others argue poor execution doomed it. But either way, the campaign fails. By January 1916, the Allies withdraw quietly in one of the few things that actually go right. Meanwhile, in a very different kind of nightmare, gas makes its debut on the Western Front. At the Second Battle of Ypres, German troops release clouds of chlorine gas. It rolls across no man's land like death's own fog machine. French colonial troops, many from Algeria, are caught without masks. The result is horrifying. Soon, both sides are inventing new formulas, new methods. Soldiers stuff urine-soaked cloths in their faces. Later, crude gas masks arrive. But the arms race has now entered the lungs. Back in the east, Russia isn't having a great time either. At the Masurian Lakes, they lose up to 200 men in snow and chaos. Austria-Hungary is crumbling, barely holding its fronts. And deep in Anatolia, another horror is unfolding. One we must whisper gently, but never forget. The Ottoman Empire, suspicious of its Armenian Christian minority, begins forced deportations. Entire communities, men, women, children are marched into the Syrian desert. Tens of thousands die of starvation, exposure, and massacre. It is a tragedy of such magnitude that, to this day, the word genocide still echoes with its shadow. International condemnation follows, but the war machine rolls on. Far from Europe, British forces make a push into Mesopotamia, modern-day Morocco, hoping to secure oil fields and outmaneuver the Ottomans. They take Basra, then push toward Baghdad. But logistics, as always, are cruel. The British advance bogs down at the town of Kut. There, surrounded, cold, and starving, thousands of British and Indian troops are besieged. Attempts to relieve them fail. When they finally surrender in 1916, it's one of the most humiliating defeats of the war. Almost half of those taken prisoner will not return. And yet, somewhere on the ocean, stories of survival float on waves of silence. In Africa, German General Paul von Lettow-Vorbeck is still at large. His guerrilla army roams like ghosts. In the Pacific, German colonies have fallen, but German commerce raiders fast, clever ships still stalk trade routes, slipping through the net. And in the trenches of France, soldiers are growing used to the taste of mud. French offensives begin at Champagne and Artois, but each gains little at staggering cost. The war, once full of motion, has become a grinding, shuddering stalemate. But the soldiers adapt. They decorate dugouts. They joke about lice. They write love poems and carve wood. A trench might be hell, but it's their hell now. As we drift further into the war's second year, we see something strange. All sides still believe that just one more push, one more offensive, will be enough. Soon, they will discover what 1916 has to say about that. For now, lay back. Let the waves of history lap gently against your thoughts. The ships have sailed, the trenches are dug, and the stars still shimmer above silent hills. It's now 1916. The war has been raging for nearly 2 years. If you were a soldier back then, you've probably aged 10. Your uniform smells like regret. You've memorized the taste of wet wool and powdered beef. And just when you think things can't get worse, someone invents a plan to make them worse. That plan, the Battle of the Somme. Here's the idea. Whispered in polished war rooms and drawn on tea-stained maps. Let's punch through the German lines in northern France. Take the pressure off Verdun and win the war before lunch. Ah, yes. Optimism. You're on the British side now. Imagine a line of men stretching for miles, boots crunching over duckboards, officers shouting above the roar of supply trucks. Many of these soldiers are volunteers, so-called PALS battalionsmen, who signed up with their friends, believing the war might be over by Christmas. It wasn't. The British planned a week-long artillery bombardment. Over 5 million shells are fired. It's deafening. The ground trembles. The generals believe no one could survive. Spoiler alert, the Germans survive. They're deep in reinforced bunkers. So when the bombardment stops and British troops rise from their trenches, the Germans are waiting, machine guns ready. The first day of the Battle of the Somme becomes the bloodiest in British military history. No casualties. In one day, a third of them dead. Here's your quirky detail. Some British soldiers advance with footballs, intending to kick them toward enemy lines. One officer reportedly shouted, "Who'll get to the German trench first?" before being shot mid-sprint. Historians still debate the battle's value. Some say it wore down the Germans. Others say it was waste on an industrial scale. What's certain is that the fighting doesn't stop. It drags on for 5 months. Mud becomes a character in this story. It sucks at boots. buries artillery, swallows men whole. The mud of the Somme is thick, sticky, and everywhere. By the end of the battle, Allied forces have gained about 6 miles, at the cost of over 1 million casualties. Meanwhile, far to the east, something rare happens. A Russian plan works. General Alexei Brusilov launches an offensive so shockingly successful that it actually surprises the Russians. His troops use new tactic: shock troops, short barrages, coordination. It's a breath of fresh air, laced with gunpowder. They smash through Austro-Hungarian lines in Galicia, taking hundreds of thousands of prisoners. The offensive is so effective it forces Germany to shift troops from the Western Front. But it's not all glory. The Russians are exhausted, under-equipped, and lacking reserves. Soon the advance slows, and Austria-Hungary, well, it never really recovers. Oh, Han, here's something a bit odd. In Italy, fighting continues along the Isonzo River. If you've never heard of the Isonzo battles, don't worry, there are 12 of them, and most end the same way. Not gain, heavy casualties, and everyone wondering why they came. The landscape is all cliffs, rivers, and boredom laced with terror. One Italian soldier said, "The enemy isn't Austria, it's the mountain." He wasn't wrong. Meanwhile, in the skies above France, something terrifying and beautiful is happening. The air war is maturing. Planes buzz overhead like mosquitoes with engines. Pilots duel in open cockpits with scarves trailing and pistols drawn. And here, we meet the Red Baron, Manfred von Richthofen-Young. Aristocratic and unnervingly good at flying, becomes Germany's top ace. His bright red Fokker triplane becomes a symbol of death from above. He scores 80 confirmed kills and becomes a legend in his own lifetime. But it's not just flair. Air war matters. Reconnaissance planes guide artillery. Fighters protect bombers. It's chess, played on clouds. And it's only getting bloodier. Back on land, the French have been clinging to Verdun for most of the year. The battle started back in February 1916 and still hasn't ended. General Falkenhayn, Germany's former commander, had hoped to bleed France white. He succeeded, just not in the way he expected. The French survive at unimaginable cost, over 700 NOLA casualties combined. The word Verdun will haunt French memory forever. They shall not pass. They said, and they didn't. And while we're on bad ideas, remember the Gallipoli disaster. Well, guess what's happening in Mesopotamia? The British advance stalls. The town of Kut is surrounded. After months of suffering, the British surrender. 0 troops go into captivity, half never return. The empire has taken another punch to the ribs. But amid the gloom, something remarkable happens on the sea. The Battle of Jutland. It's the only major naval clash of the war: Britain's Royal Navy versus Germany's High Seas Fleet. The fighting is fierce. Ships explode like firecrackers. Over 0 sailors die. Tactically, it's a draw. Strategically, Germany retreats to port and rarely comes out again. Britain holds the seas. Now, let's drift inland again, toward Europe's beating heart. Romania. Encouraged by the Russian success, Romania joins the war on the Allied side. They march into Transylvania, confident and proud. Then the Germans, Austrians, and Bulgarians descend like wolves. The Romanian campaign collapses. Bucharest falls. Their army is shattered. It's a grim reminder that enthusiasm doesn't stop bullets. As 1916 closes, the world is exhausted. Millions are dead. Civilians are starving. Empires are groaning under the weight of prolonged war. Austria's old emperor, Franz Joseph, finally dies after 68 years on the throne. His successor, Karl, inherits an empire on the brink. In Britain, Prime Minister Asquith resigns. David Lloyd George takes his place, promising energy, victory, and sandwiches for all. Okay, maybe not the sandwiches. And in France, General Joffre steps aside, replaced by General Nivelle, who believes the war can still be won with one bold push. Spoiler alert, this will be important. Tonight, though, you don't have to push anything. Let the smoke clear. Let the fog of battle settle gently in your dreams. You've stood through the Somme. You've flown with the Red Baron. And somehow, you're still here. Next up, revolutions, riddles, and a telegram that might change everything. We begin this chapter not with guns, but with bread. It's early 1917. And in the frosted streets of Petrograd, formerly St. Petersburg, Russian women are lining up for loaves that never come. The shops are empty. The shelves are bare, and the air smells more like revolution than rye. Russia is breaking after years of war, millions of casualties, and mounting discontent. The Russian people have had enough. Soldiers begin to desert. Workers strike. Crowds gather, and one day, someone climbs on a box, waves their arms, and the crowd doesn't disperse. Tsar Nicholas VIII, mustachioed symbol of centuries-old monarchy trees to order control, but the army no longer listens. On the 15th of March, 1917, he abdicates. Historians still debate whether the fall of the Tsar was inevitable or simply tragic timing. Either way, the Romanov dynasty ends not with a bang, but with a train ride and a note. In his place, a provisional government takes charge on that promises democracy, reform, and, curiously, to keep fighting the war, a bold choice, considering most of the country wants precisely the opposite. And in the shadows, another voice begins to stir. Lenin, Vladimir Ilyich Ulyanov Lenin, to you and May has been watching from exile. He's not interested in half measures. He wants revolution. Full stop. And with a little help from the Germans who think sending him back might destabilize Russia further, he boards a sealed train, bound for home. But while Russia simmers, the war stirs elsewhere. Across the Atlantic, the United States has been watching with growing unease. President Woodrow Wilson, a man of intellect and idealism, has tried to keep America neutral, but neutrality is a tricky thing when ships keep sinking. German U-boats have resumed unrestricted submarine warfare. They're now attacking all ships bound for Britain, including American ones. The gamble: starve Britain into surrender before the U.S. can mobilize. Then, the Germans do something odd. They send a telegram from Foreign Secretary Arthur Zimmerman in Berlin to the German ambassador in Mexico. The message: if the U.S. joins the war, encourage Mexico to invade them. In return, they can have Texas, New Mexico, and Arizona back. You can almost hear the collective spit take. British intelligence intercepts the message. They pass it to Washington. The Americans are shocked. Newspapers run the story. Public opinion flips.